This is Eliyahu Berkowitz from Israel 365 News, coming at you live from the Golan. Today, you're getting full-on Israel 365 News reporting with Josh Wander from the Mount of Olives and our managing editor, David Sidman. And the reason for the full court press is we are yet again, Israeli citizens are heading to the polls again. I'm going to my kids' school where the polling is more than my kids are. On March 23rd. And the reason for that, if I'm not mistaken, since this is Israeli politics is a crazy thing, is that there was an agreement when Benny Gantz and Netanyahu signed an agreement, a coalition that if they could not come to an agreement on the budget, then they would go to the polls again, and that's precisely what happened. They could not agree on the budget. So for that reason, the coalition was dissolved, and we're going to the polls again. So we're trying to get a handle on this. Let's start out with let's start out with David. So David, what do you think of us going to the polls again? Does it make sense? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
Okay, well, actually, contrary to popular belief, it's actually a good thing for the economy, but I'll get into that later. I think it's important to first understand how exactly the election system in Israel works, especially since most of our viewers are Americans. People from England might have a better grasp on how the Knesset works because it's a parliamentary system that's based on the British Parliament. But basically, if you could imagine the president, the Senate, and the Congress all in one building of only 120 people who allegedly represent everyone in the nation, that in a nutshell is the Israeli Knesset. The way it works is you don't vote for the person, you vote for the party. For the party to get into that building with 120 people and the prime minister, who kind of is, obviously the most powerful, the one who forms the coalition, who makes all the decisions, you need to pass a certain threshold of, I think, 3.25% of the vote,
Correct.
which is equivalent to 4 seats out of the 120 seats. So if you can just kind of imagine, instead of Democrats and Republicans, you have like 20 different parties. You have like the Libertarians and Black Lives Matter, and you have everything, and they're all kind of like vying for your vote. And you could have like 20 Democrats, 35 Republicans, 10 Black Lives Matter, 12 Libertarians, 7 from the NRA, whatever. That's more, 4 Mormons. That's basically more or less kind of like how the Israeli government is formed. And if you can imagine, if the Republicans have a majority and they rally all these other smaller parties to what's called forming a government with them, which basically means to more or less come to agreements that will make laws much easier.
If I can interrupt, you're absolutely 100% correct. And if it sounds crazy, that is pretty accurate because the Israeli government is crazy. There are 120 seats in the Knesset, and when you vote for the party. And in order to have the prime minister, one party has to be able to assemble a coalition of more than 60 seats. They have to assemble a coalition that represents a majority. And that's the only time that the president actually has a function. He chooses the party that he thinks is most likely to able to assemble a coalition after the election, which is very rarely the party that has a majority. Usually it is the party that's gotten the most votes and has the most seats, but it is not necessarily the party that has the majority. So
by the way, it didn't used to be like that. In the early days of Israel, it was basically a 2-party system. There was the Mapai, which is the current day Labor, and the Likud. So
yeah, Robert, we're working on that. We have to get politicians to agree on it, and most of them are afraid even to talk about the temple or even the Temple Mount. But when we can get this through these practical, silly things and get past them, then God willing, we can move towards that.
Okay, well, we have a viewer who brought up the third temple, which is something I actually wanted to talk about because I did a story today.
Okay. Just let me finish up the quick explanation, the 3,000 meter view of what the elections do. So after the election, the party that seems most likely to be able to form a coalition, a majority coalition of more than 60 seats, is chosen by the president, and they have a set amount of time to form that coalition. And if they don't, another party gets a chance. And if they can form a coalition of more than 60 seats, then they get to nominate or appoint the prime minister. That gives an inordinate amount of influence to the smaller parties who, if they are essential to forming a coalition, can make demands that are specific to their party. So
just to expound on my analogy, so that, just for people who imagine that that there's 120 seats in this one building that governs all of America, and the Republicans have 35 votes, and so they have more votes than anyone else. And then what they have to do is they have to make all these deals with all these other little parties. They have to make a deal with the Libertarian Party, with the Second Amendment Party. They have to make a deal with the Tea Party. They have to make a deal with all these other little parties to form this coalition so that they can appoint, let's say, Donald Trump to be the prime minister, and then everyone else on the left, let's say, would be in the opposition, and their job is to basically give the governing coalition a headache. And Netanyahu is known as like this coalition forming wizard. One time he even didn't have his party, the Likud party, did not even have the most votes of any other party, and he still managed to whip together a coalition out of his.
Whereas the person who did get them, I believe that was Livni, got the most votes, and she could not form a coalition.
Right.
And just to show how much he is a coalition former, the coalition that just fell apart, he formed with Benny Gantz, who was the opposing party. And they managed to strike a deal that they could sit together. What
was the deal? He said, let's do this. Netanyahu said to Benny Gantz, I'll be prime minister for 2 years. And then since it's a 4-year term, you switch me and you'll be prime minister for 2 years. And as soon as the 2-year term was up, Netanyahu was like, we're going to elections. He just had snap elections.
Right, which is
it's more brilliant. It's more Netanyahu's like brilliancy as a politician. I personally am not a fan of Netanyahu, but I got to give credit where credit's due when it comes to winning elections, even if you don't win, and forming coalitions that are basically impossible on paper. Netanyahu somehow pulls it out. But I wanted to talk to you today about something that relates to Robert's question about the third temple, because a development just came about whereby two of the most I would say, how do I describe it? I don't really like to call them right wing, because in Israel, right wing takes on a much more, their parties take on a much more biblical agenda than just being right wing. In America, right wing is usually kind of pro Second Amendment, pro free speech, pro capitalism. Right wing in Israel isn't even so much about that. It's really.
If I can help you out with that, because it's parliamentary and there are so many powerful and important issues that are represented by individual groups, it's not as simple as saying Democrats are pro-trans, pro-abortion, anti-gun rights. It's not as simple as that. There are groups that are right-wing on security, meaning they don't want to relinquish Judea and Samaria. There are groups that are right-wing economically, fiscally. So it really is not accurate to divide it up in that. And also, to make it even worse, there is a movement that is anyone but Bibi, anyone but Netanyahu.
Well, so that's also in America too, though. That's they have that in America. Exactly. With anyone, look who they voted for president, Biden. Well, not one person voted for Biden because they like Biden.
It was a never Trumper election. So to say that it's the right wing that is pro temple, it may even be a little bit accurate, but I don't think it really describes it fully. So these are just These are just people who are really bucking the mainstream and even the not mainstream. There are a lot of right-wing people who will not talk about the temple or even the Temple Mount. But these are people who would be considered right-wing and are willing to speak about the temple.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you, and I'm going to explain to you why in a minute. But first of all, just to kind of better explain what I'm trying to say. In America, what you think of right-wing is usually pro Second Amendment, pro free speech, pro capitalism. Foreign wars, you can be right-wing and be against foreign wars, or you could be right-wing and be in favor of foreign wars. In Israel, what we call right-wing usually takes on a whole different connotation. Meaning Netanyahu is, I would say, capitalist, but I don't consider him right-wing. But you have these two parties like the National Union and Otzma Yehudit. They are the most right-wing parties, I'd say, running for the Knesset right now in the elections. What they are actively fighting for the land of Israel. They see going to the Knesset as a holy mission from the Bible to prevent hostile Muslim takeover of the land of Israel that God promised the Jewish people. And they're going where other members of the Knesset will not go, and they are for example, they're calling to Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we're going to talk about in a minute. He's the chair of the Otzma Yehudit party. He's calling for the sovereignty, not just of Area C, but of Area A and B. He wants to take over Ramallah and Nablus, Shechem, and all of Hebron, and he wants to get rid of the Palestinian Authority completely. It's a different right wing in Israel than it is in America. That's my point. So what happened yesterday, that's a very big deal for those of us who love the Bible and fear God. You have these two parties. One is called National Union, headed by a guy named Bezalel Smotrich, who is currently in the Knesset. You have another party called Otzma Yehudit, who is headed by a guy named Itamar Ben-Gvir. Itamar Ben-Gvir, I spoke to, he went on record in an interview I did with him and said that he is unequivocally in favor of building the third temple. Okay, that is certainly on his agenda. He is a follower of the late Rabbi Kahana, who believed in the passage in Deuteronomy, which calls on Israel to drive the enemies out of the land as soon as they settle it. And Kahana actively worked to make that happen. And what happened was you have Bezalel Smotrich, who was polling at 2 seats. Now, 2 seats isn't enough to get into the Knesset. You need 4 seats. And you have Itamar Ben-Gvir, who's polling also at about 2 seats. That's also not enough to get into the Knesset. And you have two people who are ideologically aligned. They both want to protect the land of Israel and basically save the land of Israel from a hostile Muslim takeover from the Palestinian Authority. But they couldn't unite under one ticket to get into the Knesset for some reason. Itamar Ben-Gvir called for unification, but Bezalel Smotrich balked, and and the entire pro-Israel, God-fearing right-wing camp was completely frustrated at Bezalel Smotrich because he refused to unite and secure that both him and Itamar Ben-Gvir would get into the Knesset, and instead neither of them will get into the Knesset, and the right-wing, the most right-wing pro-Israel, pro-temple, pro-Bible faction, Israeli society would have no representative because their votes would be split. Neither would get in until last night. Last night, they put their egos aside and they drew up a deal whereby in the top 4 seats on a united list, both Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich would run in the same party on a technical block, which means even though they're technically 2 separate parties, when you go and vote, they're on the same ticket. And then once they get into the Knesset, they can always split up. And so according to polls, they're polling right now at 5. Whereas before 5, which is 1 more than they need to get into Knesset, whereas before each one was polling individually at 2, which is less than half of what you need to get into the Knesset. And I think it just speaks to how unity among the Jewish people will not only bring the third temple, but it will bring representation for governing matters in the state of Israel for the Jewish people.
That's awesome. You're absolutely correct. And I want to point out, if I may, this comes at a time, if we're talking about not even right wing, as you I think rightfully pointed out, but a religious block of a specific nature coming together, putting their differences aside in order to advance the greater agenda of Torah and the temple and redemption, and at precisely the same time that we might see an election for the first time that the Labor Party will not pass the minimum threshold to be in the government. And Israelis know that the Labor Party ran the country almost unimpeded, unchallenged for the first 40 years. There was no right wing. It was entirely Labor. And now they're gone. It's really, I think, you could say, okay, election after election, but I think the election we're going to see, the next election, is really going to be a changing of guard, the change of an era, when we are seeing a coming together, a presence of politicians who have the bigger biblical picture in mind, and that's a really nice development.
Well, yeah. So I have mixed feelings about Labor. Because on the one hand, Labor has a reputation today of being left-wing. First of all, they're socialists, which I'm against. The Labor Party was an active force against religious Jews who came from Yemen to Israel.
Absolutely.
They treated them very badly. They would
not just Yemen, also Sephardi Jews in general.
Right.
Were very disheartened and felt that they were not, their voices were not heard at whatsoever in the government. And my neighbor, who's Sephardi, he puts Menachem Begin up on a pedestal because Menachem Begin was the first right wing prime minister, and he's like before the election, his house is plastered in Netanyahu posters. So
it's not so simple. All right, so I don't usually like to air Israel's dirty laundry, but I think all of our viewers love Israel, and I think it's important that they kind of understand in context what's really going on. When Jews, Eastern Jews, Oriental Jews came to Israel back in the 50s, the Labor Party would actually cut their side locks, and they would force them into secular schools. And if the Labor Party and if these Jewish people wanted to go to, religious schools, the Labor Party would say, no, well, you have to join the Histadrut. And if you don't join the Histadrut, which is the workers' union, you don't work. So labor is
also in the army. In order to be an officer, you had to sign into the Histadrut, the left-wing organization, in order to be an officer.
Right. So the labor is very elitist, very racist, very socialist. On the other hand,
that was the lightning. We're getting in the blessing of rain up here in the Golan.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. On the other hand, there's been no better party for the settler movement than Labor. I mean, it's undeniable.
It's
historically, this is the current Labor. Now, Labor has kind of evolved into this. I mean, it's not what it used to be. Merav Michaeli, who is number one, you can see in the top right-hand corner. She is an extreme feminist who is against the nuclear family. And do you know who her grandfather is?
Right. That's what I was just going to... You go for it, dude.
Kastner.
Give it the truth bomb.
Probably the most notorious Nazi collaborator in Jewish history. The most notorious... Him and George Soros are...
He was taking funds. He was the only Jew walking around Europe and walking around Nazi Germany without a yellow star and a suitcase full of cash to convince the Nazis to let secular Zionist Israelis out of Israel, and to help them convince. In Lithuania, it was said that he helped convince the shtetl Jews.
Right. So he's a he's a big chum of Eichmann. He basically convinced all the Jews of Hungary to get on trains. And Eichmann even said, thanks to Kastner, it was so easy to get the Jews on trains in Hungary because Kastner basically convinced them all that it was a good idea.
This is Kastner's granddaughter.
She's not ashamed.
Runs the Labor Party.
And not only is she not ashamed of her grandfather, she is actually proud of him, and she brags about her grandfather that he saved Jews. So this is who's running the Labor Party today. Is a little, they're kind of a joke. They're kind of a joke, but I don't know. Oh yeah, Kastner trial. Okay, we can't really read that while we're broadcasting. Anyways, the Labor Party today is kind of a joke, but historically, no party has been better for the set. No party has built more settlements than the Labor Party.
I'd like to
wait. The first prime minister of the Labor Party, who of course was David Ben-Gurion, he wouldn't let Arabs out of their villages without a note during curfews. He was the guy who, during the War of Independence, conquered and annexed Haifa, Ramle, Lud, Eilat. All of those cities used to be Arab cities. That Jaffa. He literally conquered those cities and turned them into Israel. So no one in the Likud ever did that. If you look at historically who's given up the most land, it's the Likud. So there's a real anomaly. It's not so simple as people think. It's not so black and white. Meaning, if you were to place America in the American political system in Israel, it would be the Democrats who gave up all the land and the Republicans who fight to. Well, it turns out it's kind
of like, if I can make an analogy,
rules the country.
If I can make an analogy, it's like when the Democrats scream about Trump putting children in cages, when actually the cages were constructed under Obama. And he actually turned back more. I don't know if we can call them illegal immigrants. I was told that we get censored for that expression. He turned back more people at the border than Trump ever did. And I think it's known amongst Israelis that yes, the Labor Party, especially, and the left wing, does not take apart settlements and build settlements. And the right wing is the opposite. Though I think the reason there's
Itamar Ben-Gvir, the far one on the right, is signing the agreement with Bezalel Smotrich, who is closer to us on the left. That's the signing of the agreement between the two.
So they're extreme right. So yes, I'd like to see them. They're called extreme right, and I think there is some accuracy to that. So the fact that they've joined together. I remember a lot of when I lived in Gush Etzion, a lot of the sentiment was that the problem with the right wing is that because we had such strong ideals, nationalistic ideals, that we couldn't get together, we were splintered, and therefore we kept losing and not achieving any of our goals. So it's good that they're getting together.
So I think the reason why it's so confusing, meaning Labor is labeled as left wing, Likud is labeled as right wing. Where if you actually look at the data, if you were an analyst at any high tech company and you said analyze the data, tell me who is more pro-Israel and who is less pro-Israel, they would say that the allegedly Labor is more pro-Israel and the allegedly Likud is. Even though Netanyahu will speak, he knows the Bible really well. By the way, David Ben-Gurion also knew the Bible very well. He was a huge Bible student. But Netanyahu, like today, amongst politicians, Netanyahu is a Bible scholar. He can recite passages. He could win. He could destroy most people in a Bible quiz. But when it comes to actually protecting the land of Israel, it's a different story. And what's happened now is a lot of people are very frustrated in Netanyahu, even his loyal supporters, because of the whole Corona crisis, meaning no country has suffered harsher lockdown measures than Israel. And it's been under the leadership of Netanyahu. And a lot of small business owners who were Netanyahu loyalists are now questioning their loyalty to Netanyahu. So this guy who used to be in Netanyahu's party, who was the former education minister, Gideon Sa'ar, has sprung up, and he's like, okay, well, there's a lot of right-wingers who are upset with Netanyahu. Now I'm going to pop up and challenge him. So he kind of gives an alternative.
It's a known thing in Likud that Gideon Sa'ar is probably the only one who can challenge Netanyahu. He has that much of a...
I would disagree. I would say Naftali Bennett. I would say Naftali Bennett also poses.
I meant within Likud. Within Likud.
Well, yes and no, because a lot of people see Sa'ar as kind of a traitor to Netanyahu.
Right, because he was the only challenge to Netanyahu from within. Basically,
Sa'ar needs to position himself as a Netanyahu who would handle the corona crisis better, which is exactly what another guy on the right, who's also pretty mainstream, Naftali Bennett, is doing. Now, if you look at Naftali Bennett, Netanyahu, and Gideon Sa'ar, who are three main forces on the right, there's really no real ideological difference between the three of them. Meaning the three biggest right-wing parties, there's really not much ideological. Do you disagree? Can you find any ideological difference between Netanyahu, Sa'ar, and Bennett? I can't.
Not only that, I think, you made a point, you kind of blew through it in the very beginning, but it was so on the money, and people just absolutely don't. I laugh when I hear left-wing pro-Palestinian people outside of Israel screaming, "Oh, Netanyahu is evil." I'm like, he is not right-wing. Let me tell you a quick story. Before he was elected in the first election, so many years ago, I have a friend who was a very wealthy businessman, religious, right-wing, and he there was a group of businessmen, like-minded businessmen, who met with Netanyahu before he was prime minister and when he was trying to be prime minister. And they didn't like him. Even before he walked into the room, he walked into the room and he said, "I know you folks don't like me. You think I'm a snake, and I am. I'm an opportunist. But the question you have to ask yourself is, do you want me to be your snake?" Okay. And I was told that story by the man. I kind of believe it's true. It might have been embellished. However, the point is, Netanyahu is not right-wing. He's a political opportunist. He is a brilliant economist. Brilliant. A little bit too much for the wealthier people, though. What they call supply side.
He did a lot of good things. He did a lot of good things for Israel.
A lot of good, without any question.
But after he was an economics minister, he really didn't do anything noteworthy for Israel.
These are hard times, and he's keeping Israel's head above water. So I give him credit.
At a certain point, that's not good enough. Meaning Trump, in my opinion, Trump gave him a green light to do a lot of things, and he just completely,
that's also true. If he had played his cards correctly, he could have annexed Judea and Samaria. If he had, and he did not want to. He could have. He could certainly have moved forward a lot more on the Temple Mount, and that he expressly did not want to.
He's actively anti. He
has been expressly against. Is expressly opposed Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount. That is public knowledge. So to claim that he's right wing is entirely inaccurate.
Economically, you can say that. Economically, you can say he's right.
Economically, he is right wing. Exactly what we're talking about. And even insofar as security that does not apply to Judea and Samaria, he's a former soldier, though he's not a general, which is interesting. The Blue and White Party is all generals.
He's very Iran focused and not.
He was a major in the most elite force of the Israeli Defense Forces, Sayeret Matkal.
Oh, I didn't mean to take it away from him, but he was not a general.
It's like the Israeli Delta Force, basically.
I wanted to mention, when you finish, David.
No, so I was just going to say he's extremely Iran focused, meaning I believe that he dedicates 80% of his efforts into combating Iran, but when it comes to domestic security, I believe that he's asleep at the wheel.
There you go.
So, yeah, and then you have the left wing, which is by the way, Josh, feel free to chime in. Don't hide.
Yeah, I'm actually Josh. I'm surprised you've been
board
so.
member.
Get me out of there! Jump in, dude. He's
on the board of a political party, and he's hiding behind the scenes on us. Anyways,
I was hoping to hear your take on all this, man. You're the real
at some point. So on the left, you have Gantz, who was, in the last election, if you remember, Gantz is the formidable rival of Netanyahu. He's the guy who's going to bring down Netanyahu, right? And he got a lot of votes. He almost got as many votes as Netanyahu. And I think Netanyahu got like 33 and he got 32, something like that.
Yeah.
And what's happening now? Everyone jumped ship. His entire party completely fell apart at the seams. And I think he has maybe 5 people left in his entire party. And now
Netanyahu is a master of the waiting game. He waits out until everyone falls. And then he just walks in and collects the cards.
Yeah. So who is Netanyahu's biggest challenge to the left? This guy Yair Lapid, who didn't go to the army, which in Israel is like, you're kind of today less so, but in Yair, back in the day, if you didn't go to the army in Israel, you're kind of an outcast. You're kind of a wimp.
Wait, Yair Lapid, I think he was a army spokesman.
He was completely healthy, and he could have been a combat soldier, but he chose to be a reporter. He was a reporter. It didn't count back then.
He wasn't just a reporter. He eventually became. No, I'm saying afterwards he became. He was one of the most famous anchors in Israel. He was like the Dan Rather of Israel.
I was okay.
Okay, sorry.
I was getting to that. I'm saying army service. He didn't. He kind of wimped out because he could have been a combat soldier, which was needed back in his day, and he decided to become a writer for a newspaper. He
also did not finish high school, though he applied and got accepted to a doctorate program. And then they said, wait a second, you didn't finish high school. It was a big...
I think you need to go back and speak about his father, David. His father was very influential. And
Tommy Lapid was his father. His father, although his father was probably the most anti-Bible politician Israel has ever saw.
Virulently.
A Holocaust survivor.
Right, a Holocaust survivor who I guess didn't get the memo that maybe the Holocaust was a wake-up call from Hashem. But he virulently anti-religious Jews, anti-Bible, anti-everything. To his credit, he was also anti-union. He was a bit of a capitalist without even realizing it. But yeah,
But that was his platform. He actually attracted people on the platform of people that were anti-religious, people that did not like religion in the country. They didn't want. They wanted to separate.
As I say now today, I would compare him kind of to this. In case you guys don't know, the former defense minister Victor Lieberman. He's this Russian guy. Used to be this real right wing, very right wing. Like I would even say Kahana, right wing guy. And now he's completely rebranded himself into this, appealing to all the non-Jewish Russians who slipped through the cracks in the Aliyah process, and has completely vilified anyone who's religious or ultra-Orthodox as basically.
So you're talking about Tommy Lapid, about Yair Lapid being the only real opposition from the left for. I want to point out, if I may.
There is Lieberman.
Lieberman, I just want to say I've spoken to my Russian friends. There's a lot of Russians living in Katsrin, where I live, and I can't make heads or tails out of what Lieberman says, but they love him. It's a real cultural thing. They feel that he's their representative in the Knesset. Yair Lapid,
and he used to work for the Prime Minister of Bibi Netanyahu. He was his chief of staff.
And he used to be the die-hard ally of Netanyahu.
Well, I know why? Because I think culturally Russians like a guy who has the image of no nonsense. They like Putin.
Right.
Putin is a complete tyrant. He has the aura of a no nonsense leader. Lieberman is the same way. He's always very calm, cool, and collected, and he's laser focused on his enemy, who is the ultra-Orthodox Jewish people, or anyone who believes in the Torah and the Bible.
He's very pro-settlement. He himself lives on a settlement in Oktim, and
he
was anti-Haredi.
But at the same time, he wants to give El-Fahim and the Triangle.
He has a strange idea of this. Yeah.
I mean, the truth is, if you're in favor of a Palestinian state, his makes the most sense, because he's saying, let's keep the Jewish populated areas to us and give them the Arab populated areas that are on the border of the armistice lines anyways. But wow, you're a fan, Josh. So that's kind of what he's about. But so Lapid is basically this guy's son. Lapid claims to have learned the lessons of his father, and learned also kind of what not to do, not to be a carbon copy of his father. So he claims he had a religious guy in his party when he ran. Dov Lipman who was a religious rabbi. I believe he just brought him up.
I believe man, great politician, which is why he didn't last.
But I think that in Lapid's eyes, Dov Lipman was his token religious guy. He was a fig leaf, so that he could kind of say, "Look, I'm not religious. I have religious friends." Huh?
That he could say that he was not anti-religious.
Exactly, and Dov Lipman was the perfect.
So I actually wanted to point out something about Dov Lipman. Well, not only Dov Lipman, but unfortunately, if you look at the last 4 Anglo candidates, members of Knesset, all of them, including the one that is a member of Knesset now, I'm going to put them up, or one-term members of Knesset, which is very sad. Because they did represent the 500,000 Anglos that are in the country.
I don't know about that. Anglos don't really vote as a bloc. There's no,
No, but a lot of them took on. I know that the current member of Knesset and the former member of Knesset also, they very much took on a lot of Anglo issues when people contacted them, regardless of which party they were contacting them. And they had issues with Aliyah, with transitioning to the country, with all sorts of different. They were very, very helpful in trying to reach out to the Anglo community, even though their politics didn't necessarily mesh.
I just want to point out, we've just touched on one issue from 2 different angles, which is Israel is a nation of immigrants. So when we're dealing with a parliamentary government, it's not black or white. It's a gazillion shades of gray, with each culture attaching to their person. I could never understand why the Sephardi Jews loved Aryeh Deri, who runs Shas, which is the Sephardi religious party. I never understood the connection. I don't understand Lieberman, who it's a cultural divide. And then you have religious versus not religious, and there are different versions of religious. There's Haredi versus Dati Leumi versus. So there's just so many interests, and one of these interests is cultural, and that's why this parliamentary government system is to bring a coalition together is brilliant if you can do it.
Elections are a great time for Israel's leaders to pin us against each other.
Yeah, this is Aryeh Deri. He was the Minister of the Interior. He got caught taking bribes, went to jail, came out, and his followers still loved him. I don't think they. I mean, my own theory. I can't see in the hearts and minds of. First of all, there's a lot of. There's just like there was voter fraud in America, we have the same problem here in Israel. Yes, we do.
Arab parties, and with the, not ultra-Orthodox party, much worse with the Arab parties. But there's a lot of voter fraud in Israel, just like there was in America. It's a little different because Israeli elections are like these little notes of paper. It's the most low tech, but if you think about it, maybe it's the most. It could theoretically be the most secure.
A lot of Americans who are calling to go to that system, by the way.
Hopefully, it won't be Dominion. But either way,
Dominion slips of paper is that.
there's that. So that's why he gets a lot of votes. Also, they run this kind of fear campaign that the former chief rabbi Ovadia Yosef is looking down on you from heaven, and that if you don't vote for them, then if you don't vote for Aryeh Deri, then the former chief rabbi of Israel, Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, will be upset with you. And it was kind of this bizarre campaign of like, this dead rabbi is looking down on you, expecting you to vote for them, and whatever. Then there's the people who believe who are convinced that they want their yeshivas, their seminaries to stay open, and they want to get, they want to continue getting benefits for those who study the Torah all day. Will vote for Shas, just not so much because they like Deri, just because it's economically expedient for them, convenient for them. So there's that.
There is. I just want to point out to Joshua Taiz, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, he wants only paper and ID. That's what we have in Israel, but there's still quite a bit of voter fraud. I may be misstating this, but a lot of it is in the Arab towns, because the Arab, I don't want to.
So they're trying to take measures
there is voter fraud, and there was a lot of voter fraud. I remember in the election when Aryeh Deri won with Shas. Yeah, the Arabs, you have to understand, they're 20%. Israeli Arabs are 20% of the electorate. They're the third largest party. I mean, they've all come together. It's a combination of a bunch of Arab parties coming together, but they are an element, and they do hate Netanyahu. And Netanyahu has said some very harsh things about the Arabs during the elections. But that's actually, Josh, no. We absolutely do not have mail-in. It would not, and there's
they proposed it actually.
That's kind of scary.
There's no absentees either. So if an Israeli citizen is out of the country, unless they're on official business of the government, they cannot vote.
Right. So what they do is, for example, you get free buses. You can take a bus for free to your polling station. It's an official day off. That, I mean, I used to work in restaurants, and you never got a day off, but we got election day off because it's that important here. I remember the first election Netanyahu won. He was losing by at midnight. And then they started counting the ballots that were collected from the army bases, and that's what put him over the top to beat Shimon Peres. The paper ballots creates a very different election experience. Maybe we do trust it better. I don't know, but it's a very different voting experience, and there's no such thing as let's wait till all the ballots come in. I mean, Israel's a much smaller country, but still, to vote the paper ballots from 10 million people, it's not a small deal. But they do it, and we've done it. We've done it 3 times in the last 2 years.
Before we go, I'd like to hear the latest about the Jewish Home Party, who our producer Josh Wander is a committee member of. And he's hiding behind the scenes right now, but I'd like to hear the latest update. Are they going to sign with Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir and join that ticket? Are they going it alone? Are they going to go with
in another 5 hours, everything will be clear.
But can you give us a scoop? Can you give us something? You give us a scoop?
Stay tuned tomorrow. There will be a scoop. 5 hours from now, we will have all the information on the table. Until then, we are in the middle of negotiations still, and unfortunately, I cannot reveal any of that.
I'd like to make a suggestion.
Wait. Can I ask you, are you involved in the negotiations? Are you allowed to reveal that?
No comment.
Stardust.
I'd like to make a suggestion, if I may. I personally got an awful lot out of this discussion, with the whirlwind of news that hits us every single day. I don't have time to take a breath or ask a question about this. I found this to be very enlightening. I'd like to do this next. I'm sorry.
You know what? Let's do this next
Thursday. because this is very enlightening to me. And I was seeing in the comments that our listeners really got a lot out of this, because understanding Israeli politics is craziness. It's craziness.
Why don't we do this? Anyone watching this, ask us questions you have about the Israeli political system. If you want us to expound on certain party or how the system works, or anything having to do with the elections. Eliyahu, maybe we could start interviewing some Anglo candidates who are running and kind of get an idea of their platform. And additionally, you know what would be a fun show?
Yes.
If we did a show dedicated to all the niche parties and what they're about. For example, there's a pirate party. These are literally guys who walk around with eye patches and they call themselves pirates, and they're running for the Knesset. They are actually you can vote for the pirates, and they
actually are not running this time because their leader was stuck in New York and was not able to give in the list in time because they had a deadline. He wasn't able to come back because the flights are canceled. The airport is closed, is locked up.
Airport? I thought he was going to bring a boat.
They will not accept his list by email, so therefore they will not.
I was actually quite surprised.
It makes me very.
The joke about the Greenleaf Party, which is the party of the puffers. It's the pro marijuana party. And the person who's in charge of that now is what's her name? Stav Shafir. Who? Yeah, I was shocked to see that. She was one of the up and coming. She was the youngest member of Knesset, and she was the up and coming left wing leader. And now she's in this fringe group. And to be honest, Labor is a fringe group. So yeah, if I can, I'd like to bug Dov Lipman to come on and talk with us. I've learned an awful lot from him. He is not running, but he's actually been advocating very strongly for more of an Anglo presence, an Anglo representation. And there you go. I like those guys.
Imagine those guys in your election. That's what
being a former Pittsburgher, the Pirates mean a lot to me.
There you go.
Oh, on a facial hair level, I can connect.
By the way, how do you know that the pirate guy got stuck in America? Like, where do you? We didn't report.
I think Josh is.
That's your scoop. I got you a scoop.
He is a secret. He is a secret.
Maybe he's stuck in sea. Maybe he's fighting like
maybe it's conspiracy. We didn't allow him in because we didn't want him to run and take over the Likud party.
I'd like to suggest we do this again next Thursday at the same time. I got an awful lot out of this personally, and I just can't imagine looking in as an outsider. Yeah.
Question. We want to know. We're here in Israel, so we know a lot, but we don't necessarily know what you don't know. So if there's something you want to know, elections are a big deal. Write it to you can send me editor at Israel.
Yeah, there's things like
news.
They're asking about Shaked. Yeah, Shaked is number 2 in the Yamina party after Naftali Bennett. She is number 2.
I think Shaked. What is with her? Is she's
number 2
as a model? Is she?
No, she's not a model. She's a very serious politician.
She is.
And she is number 2, as you can see on the list after Naftali Bennett.
I have to tell you that I appreciate the question about Shaked. She actually, I remember she went to Hebron and gave a speech in Hebron that literally made me cry. I wish my rabbi spoke about Hebron like she spoke about Hebron, with so much passion and love for Hebron and the patriarchs and the history and the Torah. She is definitely. I apologize for the joke. She's serious stuff. She's definitely a great leader of Israel, and I did not mean to demean her.
Okay,
as a tidbit, David Sidman. If you look at this list of Naftali Bennett of Yamina, you will see number 6 is Nir Auerbach, who was the former Jewish Home Party's chairman, as well as Edith Silliman, which was one of the members of Knesset for the Jewish Home. Number 8, number 16, Jeremy Sultan, Sultan
Whoa.
was.
He's a guy you can interview. He's a
He
guy
was
you can.
the head of the Anglo Party, Anglo faction of the Jewish. He moved all the election. Of interesting.
Coming in weird, Josh. Keep that up there for a sec. I just want to wait. Keep that up there for a sec. So number. Well, first of all, why did do you know why these people jumped ship? Is do you have any insight, or you're not allowed to disclose that either?
I know that there's
Is it just me or is audio bad? Eliyahu, can you understand what he's saying?
No, I really cannot.
Josh, your audio is really bad. Anyways, if you look, also number 7 is a guy named Abir Kara. It's still bad. No, it's really bad. I don't know why. I can hear it. You sound like try again. No, it's really bad. Just hold on. Just hold off. Number 7 is this guy Abir Kara. He's basically representing all small businesses in Israel. He started this Facebook group called Sholman, and it's all the small businesses in Israel who are frustrated with the lockdown measures, and many of them obviously went under and had to file for bankruptcy. So he was a very key acquisition by Bennett for this election. I'm surprised he didn't put him at a higher place, because he's going to bring the new right a lot of votes, much more than guys like Matan Kahana or Alon Davidi. So
there was an internal. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now you're good.
There was an internal primary in our party, in the Jewish Home Party, and Nir Orbach, who was the chairman, led one of the factions, and the other one was led by the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Hagit Moshe. Hagit won that election. She became chairman, and Nir Orbach defected and moved over to Naftali Bennett's party, which in truth he would have done so anyways. He probably would have he probably would have partnered with the Bennett party anyways. So either way, that was not such a surprise. The question is what our new leader Hagit Moshe will do with the party and 5 hours.
Well, actually, I'd like to ask you a question, Josh, if I may. Hagit Moshe is kind of this mystery who came onto the scene. You know, you have this historic party called the Jewish Home. It dates back almost to the beginning of the state. And, you know, they've just been around forever. And now all of a sudden we have this woman who I've never heard of. I don't know anyone who's ever heard of her. Just kind of suddenly springs to the leader, to become the leader of that party. What can you tell us about this Hagit Moshe person?
I wouldn't say that she's unknown. She, like I said, she is the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. She's been involved with the party for many years. Not only her husband, her whole family is very involved with the party for many years. What I can say is she represents a newer, younger crowd within the party. And the older crowd, which was, I'm not just talking ages, I'm talking about mentality here. The older crowd sort of went with the former chairman, with Nir Orbach. They were much more mainstream, Mafdal, the National Religious Party of old, and she represents the new, upcoming, younger crowd, which generally leans more to the right. So it's as far as I'm concerned, it's a positive thing.
So she's kind of doing to the party what Bennett originally did when he came into the party. Meaning when Bennett, I don't know when it was, 2012 maybe, when Bennett originally ran for leadership of the party, and he was kind of this young, wealthy entrepreneur who his whole slogan was something new is happening. He's trying to kind of attract more younger voters to this party. And would you say she's kind of doing the same thing?
Naftali Bennett did not have a history in politics. He was, like you said, he was a military man. Then he was an entrepreneur in high tech. And then he basically jumped on board in the political train. But the Moshe family has been involved in politics for many years. And like I said, she's currently the deputy mayor of Jerusalem. So she's definitely knows what she's doing politically. It's not something that she hasn't been involved with before. Although now with the negotiations that are going on as we speak, it's really being put to the test how good it's going to be, and she's threatening to run independently, which would be, in my opinion, a disaster for the party and for Israel. But we'll see.
I would tend to agree. I would tend to agree with that. All right, very interesting. Yeah. Well, okay. Listen, guys, if you have questions about the Israeli elections, because there's so much going on and it's happening so fast, and there's a lot to know, and there's a lot that we know, and we want to educate you with anything you want clarity on or you want insight on. Send us the questions however you can. We'll make sure to read them, and we'd love to talk about them with you.
On YouTube, you can go to the Israel 365 News YouTube site. We'll be posting it as an article on the Israel 365 News site, which is Israel365news.com, and you can post your questions there.
All right, let us know.
Prepared next Thursday and slam us as soon as we walk in, because this is great for me. I'm learning a lot
talking about it. And all right. Anyways, I'm David Sidman, editor of Israel 365 News from right outside of Bethlehem in Efrat. And shalom.
Josh Wander from Jerusalem, and Adam Eliyahu Berkowitz from the Golan Heights.
From the Golan Heights. You bless us, we'll bless you back. That's the way it works. Thanks so much.